probably seen this clip before.
Does Samuel L. Jackson like anime?
Yes, I do. Hentai too.
But did you know Samuel L. Jackson helped create what most consider to be the very first black anime? 2007 cult classic Afro Samurai's truly unique and stylish blend of black American hip-hop culture with traditional Japanese culture is the result of a creative collaboration between two men that could not have come from more different worlds. While Jackson was born into the segregated South and would grow up fighting for racial equality, even working as an usher at Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral, hip-hop fanatic and original creator of Afro Samurai, Takashi Okazaki, was raised in Japan, one of the most homogenous cultures in the world where almost 98% of people are the same race. So come take a seat at the bar and I'll make you the perfect drink for Afro's bloody tale of revenge as I tell you the incredibly unlikely story of how these two men came together to bring black representation to anime. Today on Mixing Media. Before we get into it, I just want to take a moment to say that a lot of the stuff I'm going to be talking about today, from black representation in media to racial equality, you know, these are things that I can give you the history of, I can tell you what other people said, but they're not my personal experiences. So I'd like to ask any people of color watching this to share your experiences if you feel comfortable doing so, because that is such an important part of this story that I won't be able to tell. But with that, on to the show. As the man that has just decapitated young Afro's father right before his eyes walks away, he tells the boy two things. First, that he'll carry what he just saw with him for the rest of his life. And second, that when Afro's ready for revenge, he'll be waiting. This sends Afro on a journey to avenge his father as he dedicates his life to spilling the blood of his enemies. So in honor of his life's mission, I'll be making the blood of my enemies from renowned bartender Eric Castro that combines the orangey, floral flavors of Italian liqueur Amaro Montenegro with the bitter, herbal vermouth, puntimas, and dark rum into a rich and bittersweet drink that'd be great for Afro when he wanted something harder than his usual lemonade. And with everything that he goes through on this journey, he's gonna want something stronger than his usual lemonade. See, Afro's thirst for revenge has trapped him in the never-ending cycle of violence caused by the battle to possess the #1 headband. But it's not the headband Afro is after, it's revenge on the man who now wears it after killing the previous #1, Afro's father. This man, being based on old Western cowboys, is very ironically and intentionally named Justice. In fact, Afro Samurai producer Eric Calderon revealed that Okazaki intended him to parallel George Bush. But in order to be able to challenge Justice, Afro has to become the #2 headband, which is basically the worst position you could be in, because while only the #2 headband can challenge #1, anybody can challenge #2. So Afro has to not only avenge his father, but also fight off all the others vying for his headband. And that's pretty much the entire story. It's not a particularly complex show, but it does do a great job at showing the weight that this endless cycle of violence puts on Afro and also the family, friends, and even children of the people he slaughters on his quest for revenge. And if this sounds heavy, that's because it is.
You alright, man?
No.
And one of the ways that Afro copes with this is by disassociating from all of his emotions and storing them in his only friend Ninja, both of whom are actually voiced by Samuel L. Jackson, his performance speaks for itself.
Hey, that a motherfucking RPG? A RPG in a motherfucking backpack?
Shut up.
He really adds some much-needed levity to an otherwise pretty bleak and gray world. The only splashes of color come from the blood spewing out of Afro's opponents during just stunningly animated fights. And that's really what this show is all about, the visuals. I mean, beyond being one of the few anime at the time to prominently feature accurately depicted black people, I'm looking at you, Mr. Popo, from the other character designs to the landscapes, the visuals are an incredibly unique combination of retro vibes and future technology with feudal Japan into what feels like a sci-fi old western. A fantastic example of how all of these different things intersect is when a woman uses a flip phone to download Afro's dreams onto an SD card that then gets cut in half by a katana. You ain't finding that anywhere else. And that's because it is insane, but Afro Samurai just makes it work as it weaves all of these vastly different things together into this love letter to Black American culture that resonated deeply enough with Samuel L. Jackson that as soon as he saw it, he knew he wanted to be a part of the show. And looking back to how he grew up in the segregated American South, you can start to see why. Samuel Leroy Jackson, I never knew that was what the L stood for before this, was born in 1948 in Washington, D.C., but shortly after moved with his mother to Chattanooga, Tennessee when she separated from his father. And like Afro, Jackson would lose his father at a young age as he succumbed to alcoholism, which foreshadowed the problems that he himself would face with addiction later in life. But before facing that, he'd have to face the hardships of growing up during the Jim Crow era. In interviews, Jackson has said that he didn't really think anything of these hardships because for him, it was just everyday life. But looking back on it now, he recalls growing up in houses with no running water and white kids yelling slurs at him out of the school bus windows as they drove by. And aside from race, Jackson also struggled with a stutter that he got over when he literally just imagined himself as someone without a stutter, which is fascinating. I didn't know that was an option. This stutter is actually why he says, so much in all of his movies, because it's powerful enough to just pile drive its way through any sort of block created by his stutter. But despite all these things he had to deal with, he did super well in school. He did so well that the other kids would fight him because they thought that he made them look dumb. But Jackson's drive to succeed academically also set him on the path to becoming an actor when, for extra points, he joined a drama class and developed a passion for performing that would eventually lead him to be an Afro Samurai. But first, it would lead him to pursue a drama degree at the historically Black Morehouse College in Atlanta, Georgia. And it was here at Martin Luther King Jr.'s alma mater that Jackson would learn of his assassination in 1968, which immediately led him to get involved with the civil rights movement. He volunteered to work as an usher at MLK's funeral and afterwards flew to Memphis to participate in the sanitation workers' strike that King had been leading prior to his death. Upon returning to Morehouse College, Jackson and some other students held members of the Board of Trustees, including Martin Luther King Sr., hostage, demanding student input on the school's curriculum. And while these demands were met, Jackson was expelled and hit with a second-degree felony charge. This also caused the FBI to visit his mother and tell her that if he didn't get out of there, he'd be dead in less than a year. This scared the bejesus out of her, as it would any mother, so she immediately bought Jackson a one-way plane trip and forced him to move to LA. And shortly thereafter, another bastion of Black culture would follow him there before making it halfway around the world to start Takashi Okazaki on his journey to creating Afro Samurai. And that was the TV show Soul Train. Now, I actually remember watching Soul Train as a kid on the WB channel when the after-school cartoons would end, but I don't think that's the average experience for somebody my age, so let me give you some context. Soul Train was a variety show targeted at young Black audiences and primarily featured people dancing to live musical performances from soul, R&B, and later hip-hop artists. And starting in the 70s, it made its way over to Japan mainly thanks to the manga artist and disco fanatic Ai Amori, but that's a whole long story for another day. Okazaki developed an interest in Soul Train while searching for the R&B and soul artists that influenced hip-hop groups like Public Enemy after he discovered one of their albums as a teen in the late 80s, early 90s. And it's not hard to see the effect this had on him. I can see a lot of the politics and fight the power messaging of Public Enemy's music in Afro Samurai as Afro fights a white guy named Justice who holds all the power. But as Okazaki absorbed Soul Train's Black culture, he started combining it with his other passion, art. He recalled drawing Black characters on tissue boxes or really just anything he could get his hands on as a kid. And this would continue into adulthood when, feeling burnt out from his job as a visual designer, he would create the magazine No Know How for fun, and in it, published the very first version of Afro Samurai in 1998. Not too long after, Okazaki's brother, the Japanese celebrity Smelly, yes, Smelly,
Can you smell me?
would form a connection with a figure manufacturer, allowing Okazaki to produce some figures of Afro. And believe it or not, it was one of these figures that got Afro Samurai turned into an anime. Remember Eric Calderon, that producer that said Okazaki based justice on George Bush? Well, he was also the one that discovered the toy and, knowing it'd be a hit in America, brought it to Gonzo, who eventually got to work on a trailer to use as they pitched for funding. And it was that trailer that would make its way into the hands of the now famous Samuel L. Jackson. See, after Jackson's move to LA, he would eventually finish up his degree in drama and move to New York, where he would act on Broadway. This would lead him to eventually start acting in film, where he would land his breakout role as Jules Winfield in the movie Pulp Fiction. And the rest is history. Jackson's career absolutely exploded, and today he is the highest earning actor in history. So as his career led him from country to different filming locations, eventually he would find himself in Japan, where he would discover anime, and by the time that he left, he had a huge box of the stuff. So he went home, binged it, and fell in love with 90s classics like Ninja Scroll and Kite, which he would later go on to star in a live action of. And the funny part is, none of this stuff was even subbed. Like, he had no idea what was going on. He just liked what he saw. And this is exactly how he felt when he discovered the trailer for Afro Samurai. So he immediately reached out to Okazaki and said that he wanted to get involved in the project. And during the development process, Jackson provided a lot of his own input on the show. And while I can't tell you exactly which parts were his doing, I can tell you that he's the reason Afro gets lucky in episode 2. But ideas weren't the only thing that Jackson brought with him. His credibility also helped them to land a budget of $1 million per episode, which, for context, is about 4 to 5 times what a normal anime would cost back then. And this budget really paid off, because to this day, Afro Samurai is the only anime to ever win an Emmy. But even more than that, it was loved by the black community in a way that Okazaki never expected, because he was just drawing black characters because he personally enjoyed to. It wasn't until he made his first appearance at an American anime con and saw a line of about 400 young black men forming that he realized the impact the show had. This especially hit him when one fan told him that he had been waiting so long for a hero like Afro. But Samuel L. Jackson, on the other hand, who had lived through segregation, fought for civil rights, and was now one of the few mainstream black actors in Hollywood, absolutely was aware of the impact it would have to bring to anime a world that he once described as the kind of place where the women are as tough or as lethal as the men. There's no black or white racial divide, just people trying to live, struggling between life and death. And that, my friends, is the legacy of Afro Samurai. Again, please do let me know about your experience with Afro Samurai down in the comments, and check out my Don to Don episode, where I take another trip through history all the way back to World War II. But with that, I'm Austin. Thank you so much to all my Patreon supporters, and I'll see you here next time on Mixing Media. Bye-bye!